So in an effort to wrap my head around the Hotwire and stimulus mindset, I wanted to try building a small reusable behavior. In this case, I want to build a behavior that allows preloading of a link based on the hovering over that link. So to explore this, we have a list of products, and if we click into the product, we can see that it takes about 500 milliseconds for that product detail to become available. And that's because there's a 500 millisecond sleep command at the top of this page. So what we'd like to do in order to increase performance is preload some of these links. Now, Hotwire comes with the ability to preload links out of the box. So we can take this data turbo preload attribute, and we just put that on any link. And if we now refresh the page, what we'll see is that immediately all of those links are being prefetched. And that's 500 milliseconds. And assume that 500 milliseconds means demand on the server, on the database. We don't necessarily want to preload all of those links because also they're likely going to be unnecessary. Of these 10 product links, maybe the user only clicks into one. And you can see we do get an instantaneous render there, but at what cost? So what I wanted to explore was the idea of not prefetching all of the links, but prefetching the links only if the user hovers over the link for some period of time. Because let's say user wants to get to 107, they're going to have to mouse over all of these to get to 107. So we don't necessarily want to prefetch all of these in preparation for product 107. We only want to prefetch 107 when it looks like the user's about to click into it. So how might we do this? We get rid of our data turbo preload. And what I want to do is create some sort of a hover container, provide it with a hover threshold, something like 300 milliseconds, 500 milliseconds, and then tell it what hrefs we actually want to preload. So to do that, I'm going to create a stimulus controller, and I'll put that on the LI here. And our controller is called hover preload. Now we want to supply that hover preload with a duration, and we'll do that with this value data hover preload delay value. So the hover preload is our controller identifier. We then provide values with the identifier, the name of the value, and then the value suffix. And here we're going to say 500 milliseconds. And now we want to tell this controller which links to preload. And we can do that with a target. So I'm going to grab this target. And again, that's data hover preload, which is the controller identifier, the target suffix, and then the name of that target link. So we have three things at play here. We have the controller itself, the delay value, and the link target that we want to preload. And if we now go in and refresh this page, what we'll see is we have no initial network activity. But then if I hover over this for 500 milliseconds, you can see we get that prefetching of product 101. Similarly for product 102, 103, etc. If I move quickly though, you'll see that we don't get any additional network activity because my hover threshold is not being matched. So the idea being now that if I wanted to go down to 107 and I'm reading as a user, now it's prefetched, and when I go to click in it, we get an instantaneous loading. And inside of our product page, let's just quickly look at this, I have a console log saying that this product is being rendered at the current time string. And what we'll see here, let's just refresh all this to get clean data. What we can see here is that when I prefetch 101 and click into it, we get two strings saying that product 101 has been rendered. The first one coming out of the page cache, and then the second one being that 500 millisecond delayed re-rendering of the live content. That 500 milliseconds in this case is the sleep at the top of the product, not the delay for the hover. I don't want to be confused there. So let's take a look at how this works. The concept is fairly straightforward. We're going to have our link target and our delay configuration, and then internally we're going to have a hover timer. When the user, let's skip over this, whatever. Essentially, if there's no link target, then I don't bother setting up the events. The events in this case are going to be the hovers. So if we jump down to the setup events, we're going to set up a mouse enter and a mouse leave. When the user mouses into, we're going to set up that hover timer. And if that hover timer has a chance to execute, we're going to call this handle timeout. And the handle timeout is going to call the preloading of the links. if the user leaves, we tear down that timer so it doesn't have a chance to call the handle timeout. Now, under the hood here, the preload links is using, I think, an undocumented API. It's hard to tell because honestly, the API for the core objects in Stimulus are barely documented from what I can find. So I just went into the Hotwire repository for the turbo drive, I think it was, and I just looked at what APIs are on that object. It exposes this turbo.session that's documented, but then turbo session preloader is not documented. There is a preloader class under the hood, and all I do is I loop over the link targets and I pass each target to this preload URL, and that is the thing that gets preloaded. I'm going over this fairly quickly because the concept here is not terribly interesting. The mechanics of the controller itself aren't that fascinating. It's just a hover with a timer. The fascinating part to me is the attaching of the controller to the DOM, giving each one of these links their own instance of the controller, and then preloading based on that hover intent. Now, coming from an Angular background, stuff like this is not as intuitive because in Angular, I'm much more used to thinking about controlling an entire view. But the philosophy of Hotwire and Stimulus's JavaScript sprinkles outlook on life is that we want to take those views and decompose them into as many small reusable behaviors as possible. So this isn't a products view controller. This is a controller that handles just the preloading of arbitrary links based on hover behaviors. And in that way, we can use it on our products link page. We can use it on any other page in our application, and we should be able to reap the same benefits. So I'm really enjoying this sort of shift in low-level, decomposable, reusable mindset. And I think it makes a lot of sense, especially when thinking about the turbo drive page cache. So hopefully there was something interesting here.